Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Surbhi Pokharna. I'll be talking about applying a security mindset to lock down your Azure SQL database. Quick intro about myself. I'm a database professional with 20 plus years of experience. Currently, I'm involved with an enterprise scale cloud data migration and leading a global data platform services team. Here is my contact information. If you have any question after this session, then feel free to shoot me an email or message on Twitter. I'm going to turn off my camera for some time so that you can get the full view of presentation slides. So today we are here to talk about Azure SQL data security mindset. And end goal of this session is not only to give you a glimpse of what, how, and whys of Azure SQL data security, but also I want you to walk out with a data security mindset to do the right configuration in your environment. Let's pick an analogy of car safety. So do you know that cars are designed to fail? Nobody can claim that a car would never have an accident. So let's stop driving then. No, we don't stop driving, but we plan for the failure. Let's create multiple layers of defense mechanism from, let's say, crumple zone to seat belt to airbags, and with the latest technology, car safety has taken new highs with high-tech safety features like 360-degree cameras, sensors, blind spot detection, and whatnot. So what do we notice here? We see an ever-evolving multi-layer defense system to minimize the impact, right? And exactly same story goes with the data security. So there is nothing unique about the databases. With anything in security, we always think in layers, because if one layer fails, then also you are not left unprotected. Defense in depth is the key for every aspect of security, including Azure SQL security. So as you see in this picture, network is like in our security perimeter. We have this stuff inside a great big firewall, and we are confident that's going to protect it. No, that's not really true. In the cloud, well, that service is first of all not sitting on my own network most of the instances, right? And then there are types of services that are dedicated that can sit on my virtual network, but still it is in the cloud. So we have to think more than just the network. We have to think about other layers, and each layer contains multiple sub layers. So what do we do? Let's think about something as if like data would be a living being. So now here let's imagine the life of data in Azure SQL from the security lenses. So what are those layers, right? I just mentioned about we have the layers and then sub layers. So what are those layers and sub layers? Okay, so here is what do we see? We see like a comprehensive and innovative security portfolio Azure SQL has to offer to secure our application workload. Now, isn't it looking like super simple, easy piece of cake? Huh? Don't worry. I know it looks a bit complicated. It looks like multiple sub layers and multiple layers and all. It's even though it looks heavy, it is not that complicated. And we are going to peel off one layer at a time and then one sub layer at a time so that we can like really understand what is there underneath. And then it, like as I said, right, that then we walk out with our that security mindset, what we need to do for our own configuration. So now, when we talk about this is what Azure SQL or Microsoft's Azure SQL offering from the security, comprehensive and innovative security portfolio. So when our ask is, we have to build our successful security story using these defense in depth layers. So not only we need to understand what are the offerings, but also we need to have mastery on our own production workload, our own situations, our scenarios applicable on our own data environment. And these are like, as we see, like, there are more security considerations than just the official security portfolio, like compliance and data privacy. that is a shared responsibility reminder, right? Like if I cannot, I should have some group only read only access, but instead of that we provide write access. So then no offering can, help you with that. So that is why we call it compliance and data privacy is the shared responsibility. And here comes two more fundamental building blocks: monitoring and backup, restore, and replication. So the thumb rule is you're as good as you monitor. And one second, just let me, yeah. And have a solid, and also we need to have a solid backup and high availability solution implemented which we need to keep testing periodically. Okay, underscore bold star star. Make sure that if we have a solid backup high availability solution implemented and we keep testing it periodically. So in today's session, we'll stick with this our small comprehensive security portfolio and we'll go in detail one layer at a time. So let's begin with the network. Network security, there are two sublayers: firewall rules and network security groups or NSGs, and another one is private link for Azure SQL database. So firewall rules and network security. So before further ado, let's me introduce our setup and have a small demo around firewall rules and network security. So there you go. Okay, so this is, as you can see, we are here in Azure portal, and my resource group name is Surbhi, and I have, let me just zoom in a little bit. I have two Azure SQL instances in this resource group Surbhi. One Azure SQL instance name is SQL Server name is AZ SQL Sec Mindset, and another one name is AZ SQL No Sec Mindset. Also, we have one virtual machine. This is the VM. We'll be using this VM as our jump host. So to connect to these no sec mindset and sec mindset Azure SQL servers. So as the name suggests, sec mindset is the one where we have configured, like I think almost all the defense in depth layers, and no sec mindset is the one which we will be using for our demo. And also it is like something like, sort of bad guy kind of thing, or less configured, just to see the difference. What is a security mindset configured instance and what is a no security mindset configured instance. So these are the two things, and my entire presentation and demos, everything would be revolving around these two Azure SQL instances. Okay, now going back to begin with, for firewall rules and network security groups, let's start with no sec mindset. So here we are inside our no sec mindset. Okay, like if I scroll down, one of the things which is like really cool I like about Microsoft these oops, one second. Nicely the security comprehensive security, all offerings on all the security features, they have been given in like a one-stop shop kind of view. So it really helps to understand for every Azure SQL, when you configure Azure SQL Server, what are the security features belong to that, or what are the all possibilities we have for that particular Azure SQL instance. So this is something like, it's a great visual. It really opens up those things that these are my sort of, defense in depth layers. What do we do with this one, or what do we do with the other one? So this is something like earlier times, right? In our on-prem days and all that, it was something very difficult. We would collect and make our own picture, but here it is something really cool. So as we are supposed to start with firewall and virtual network. So let's go further inside for the firewall and virtual network. Okay. Now, before I dive further into firewall rules, I just want to pick this one setting, which is really important. Allow Azure services and resources to access this server. So as you can see, right, I have set this setting as no. So now what does this setting means? If I would have set this thing as yes, so this option then would allow any Azure resources in the cloud, right? Not only like my VNet or my application or any of my thing, any Azure resources Just a second. Yeah, so it would allow any Azure resources, VM application or Cloud Shell to access the public endpoint for the database deployment. So we would prefer, right, not to pick this option, set this option as yes, because who knows, right, what type of bad actors have created resources in Azure and would try to access our database. So this setting is very important, that we understand the meaning and we 99.99% I'll say can set it as no. There are few exceptions. Let's not go further into those kind of exceptions, but it should be basically set as no. So that at least that is like, call it like a step one. Since we are here in firewall and virtual network scenario, that's why I'm not going into public access, what does this mean and all that. But basically, since I have not selected that deny public network access, right? And we were talking about life of a data. Data is sitting in Starbucks and having coffee. And data is something like, there is some, or somebody is sitting, like, let's put it different. Someone is sitting in Starbucks having coffee, and then that person is just, want to trade or want to do something like watch a movie on Netflix. So any kind of, so you would be going through the various kind of authentication, authorization, network, firewall, all the layers. So this thing is basic plain vanilla English. You can, if I said this yes, you can not, like, any Starbucks or any random machine from my, even though I wanted to have like connect, but it cannot connect. So for no sec mindset, we have set it like that, that I really want my Azure VM, my other VM, to connect to this particular Azure SQL instance. So that is why we are not building a private endpoint, which we would cover pretty soon. And that is why this setting is set as like, we have not checked this setting. So we are able to connect to public network, and we'll see the difference when we would not have. So coming back to firewall, now my ask is, I want to create one firewall rule so that my jump host, right? My poor jump host cannot connect to AZ no sec mindset. So that I'm whitelisting one IP address so that I can connect to this no sec mindset instance. So let's go to our jump host and see how does that look, what does that mean and how it looks. Yeah. Okay, so we cancel that. So this one is my jump host. And as we saw, right, there is no firewall rule. We have not whitelisted this particular IP address to AZ SQL, to NoSec mindset Azure SQL instance. So in that case, and I have this one SQL Server Authentication and NoSec mindset user. When I try to connect, what it says? It says your client IP address does not have access to the server. Sign into an Azure account and create a new firewall rule to enable access. So let's do that. Bingo. So here is the firewall rule. It picked my IP address. Now this is going to whitelist my IP address. And here I am, right? I can connect to my whatever my NoSec mindset database is. I can connect to this database. So what we did, our jump host, we created one firewall rule. But this is something, only one IP address, right? My jump host. So when we go back to and let me just, quickly do refresh here. What do we see here? See, this is what exactly I meant. That now this particular firewall rule would appear here. And this is the one which we just now created. Now, okay, so now what you can think that, okay, you can easily like envision that we can connect from this one jump host to this particular SQL Server instance. Great. How about I have an IP range? Right, you have like some sort of somebody from like big different IP ranges that wants to connect. Then are we going to like literally whitelist each and every IP? No. So then here is the another option that is called virtual network, right? So this one is the firewall. We already checked this one, and now the virtual network for I'm trying to, so here is the IP range of the IP addresses. You have to like sort of whitelist that range of IP addresses, create like one VNet rule. Now, when you are thinking about, oh, you have a rule, right? And these are the rules at the some very different higher level with your like network security engineers. You can build various types of monitoring so that what kind of IP addresses are hitting this IP range and whatnot kind of thing. But like in the simple plain vanilla thing, if you have a, excuse me, requirement to connect to range, then here is the option for virtual network. Okay, now there, as we earlier discussed, right, that we have a firewall rule and virtual network, but another 1 minute. Okay, third option is that if we have to, so we have to, let's go back and see what is the difference with the private endpoint. Any questions so far? Because now I'm going to move to private endpoint. So yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mention earlier how do I want to take the questions as Jean asked. I'm perfectly fine. Any one of you suddenly just want to say that, oh, just stop it and I have this question, because the point is we are really covering a lot and we have 1 hour. So by the time you will reach to Azure Defender and vulnerability assessment, you might be thinking, oh, that private endpoint or firewall rule question is like not applicable anymore. So when in general, typically I would like that when I complete firewall rule and private endpoint, and then we move to the next layer. Before that, we just cover any question within that layer. But if it's still, it's completely flexible, however you want to stop me and we can discuss those. Okay. Moving to, so we picked these two options. Okay, now if I go and see this private endpoint for my sec mindset, because that is where, as I said, right, I have configured things a little bit differently. So in the sec mindset, there is like firewall rule, as you can see, right? There is no virtual network, there is no firewall rule. Deny public network access is enabled. So nobody can connect from the public network. Even from my local laptop, I would try to connect to this AZSec mindset, it would error out, and we will see that. Okay, so the minute I do deny public network, other than the TLS version, rest everything is sort of disabled. And we will be creating then private endpoints. Private endpoint is, just think about that, and we'll cover these scenarios in detail in the next slide. Private endpoint is something you get an IP address within your VNet, and then you have a various methodologies and requirements and scenarios how you would be connecting to that IP address. But here is something, you have an IP address and that is only you can connect. So why don't I connect my local machine to try to connect to this AZSec mindset and see that if I'm able to connect from my local, it is exactly same like somebody random person from Starbucks is trying to connect to this security mindset. So in order to simulate that scenario, there is my, there you go. So this is my local machine SSMS, nothing in Azure, right? And I'm trying to connect to AZSec mindset and okay, that was loud. What does it says? Cannot connect to this, the full instance name Azure SQL instance. Reason: an instance specific error occurred while establishing a connection to SQL Server. Connection was denied since deny public network access is set to yes. So like it's like so visible that when you set that checkbox to yes, then you cannot connect to any public network access. So there is no point in even I whitelist this my local machine to Azure, because I have not even picked that option of firewall. So there is nothing but only one option. I create one, IP whitelist, create a private endpoint. Okay, so now let's go back. Oops, it's not liking. Let's go back to our private endpoint. So we did notice, right, that when we this our private endpoint actually I have already created, because otherwise it takes a lot of time during presentation time. So let me go back to one of the, yes, this is exactly I wanted to talk about. So here are like a couple of scenarios, like creating a private endpoint inside a VNet in Azure. So here this is something like, one second, if I can go Oh, that's always the problem. You have to go back. And yeah, so as you can see, right, I have numbered these things like 1, 2, and 3. So one of this here is in the right in the middle is our private endpoint 10.0.0.5. So if this private endpoint is sitting inside in this one VNet, SQL DB VNet, and in this VNet, whatever is the IP range we can connect, because we have picked this particular IP from the available IP range in this VNet. Now we can have multiple other scenarios. Just think about that. Hey, I have an application running in on-prem. We are just, figuring out if we can use some Azure services, and our SQL Server instances like huge licensing cost and maybe not all the secured and defense in depth layer. Why don't we have like an Azure SQL instance in cloud? And we can just connect our on-prem application to this Azure SQL. So the best thing is, we'll obviously from there you have to figure out your network like express route or VPN gateway based on the requirement, but then we'll have this private endpoint connection with the IP address, and that is how your on-prem applications would be connecting. Second simple scenario is like what I'm doing, right? I have a jump host right here in Azure, and I'm connecting my jump host to this sec mindset. Third instance is I have a different VNets within Azure, and different kind of, like maybe hub and spoke model or any other kind of model, where from those different various other VNets, I want to try to connect to this particular, or I have various types of applications, and we need to connect to this private endpoint. So these are typical, right? Like, or to be honest, like there can be many scenarios, there can be many areas which we can cover, but it's very important that we pick like most probable, most possible scenarios, and then we cover those around things so you know that what it is. So conclusion is that Azure SQL private endpoint helps in securing the connection coming to your Azure SQL database. We can deny the public network access, as you saw that, and just make it available for a specific VNet using like DNS or the private IP. Okay, so we have already understood the demo and understood these points, like how it would work. So moving along. Access and authentication. So we are now connected using our secured network architecture as per our requirement, right? Because I showed firewall and private endpoint, you have to pick as per your requirement. And then comes the access and authentication parts. These are different flavors of authentication and authorization. But what is fundamental meaning? Authentication, who you are. Like, are you like a legitimate entity who can connect to my database? If not, then like, just disappear. We don't need you here. Forget about like all the access and flavors and all that. So authentication is the number one thing, which is something as an organization we need to identify. And then authorization. What can you do? Okay, but irrespective of authorization, what can you do? The key access security concept is least privileges. And least privileges is something that we have to, like as an organization, as a group, as a database professional, we need to make sure and then as a work together with all and collaborate with all other different teams and make sure that we understand every group what kind of access they need and give them what they actually need, rather than giving them like some role-based or entire groups and everything. So we need to develop like separation of duties, right? We need to develop our own role-based access matrix. And then type of security principle, and understand like a little bit more around, this area about what Azure SQL has to offer. So I'm just, in this area, because this itself is like a really vast field. I'm picking something high level stuff here. So when you deploy your Azure SQL instance, during that Azure SQL Server deployment, there is something like similar to our old SQL Server style SA account. And so as the name suggests, it is an admin account which can do anything on the server. And this is SQL Server SQL authenticated account. And if you want to use AD authentication like Windows for SQL Server, you need to have like an AD admin too. And in the latest, I think December or latest security changes, there is more to come in AD side, and we can like completely disable SQL Server authentication, and I'll come to that one. So bottom line is, like, we all understand, right? There is nothing like sysadmin account in Azure SQL. But this server admin, like as you see, this one sec mindset is during the initial deployment I created. This server admin and this particular Active Directory admin. These are the only two accounts which have like a sort of similar access limited option available in Azure SQL, like a privileged access. And this account is already configured and created during that creation deployment of this SQL Server, Azure SQL Server. And we cannot change this name. Only thing what we can do, we can reset the password. Okay, now moving along, Azure Active Directory, actually this one is something like more, I'll go back to my demo environment and show you that. So let's go to our, where did that go? Database. Okay, so here is my instance, and as we, come on, there you go. Right. So as we, we saw that the sec mindset is the server admin, and all you can do is the reset password. Now with Azure Active Directory, this is the one setting which I was trying to explain. And we have the option for our application where we can only pick Active Directory authentication. It is like sort of Windows authentication kind of thing. And if since we are not going in that much detail, if you really have like some kind of application teams and you're looking for having like some roles, and so this is the thing when you have to first, plan your show before just removing everything and just relying completely on the Active Directory authentication only. But yeah, this is the option. Then it would, your SQL Server, Azure SQL instance would not allow any SQL Server authentication. It would be like no mixed authentication anymore, just the Active Directory authentication. So this is the one which this is like sort of AD counterpart of your SA account. Okay, now let's go back to presentation. There's another aspect which is very important. Like as I said that you have to make your SQL Server role-based access matrix. So the first layer we interact with is the SQL Server. Now for a non-managed instance, there's really like very little we can do at the SQL Server level, right? And so this is the first layer. And this is more like how you are planning your role-based access matrix. So around those things, it's important. And next layer is the database. Now database is the thing where actually it really starts getting involved. There is a whole set of database role that we can leverage, and we'll take a quick peek at that on them. And now these database can be like a single database, or like it can be multiple databases with a set of resources. But we can have like these schemas per database, or within or however based on like sort of containers, right, based on our application, our requirements. And these containers are for the resources, which can be table views or stored procedures. So this one is something like when we go and check all our roles and permissions. So here is the screen snapshot with you can have permissions, which you can, as we saw, schema level, object level, you can do the grant, revoke, deny model. You go stick with the roles, that is a little bit better, because now here you have most of all the roles are actually, to be honest, exactly same as SQL Server, except these two roles which are there in the master database, DB manager and login manager. So the DB manager, this role provides the authority to create and delete databases. By default, being a member of this role doesn't provide access to any database. But if you create a user for the login, having this permission, they would be able to delete the database too. This login, when create a new database, will also be the owner of the database. And the second one is login manager. They can create and delete login. So other than that, rest all database role exists like, on all other user databases. These are the only two roles which are like different here in Azure SQL, different in the master database. Okay, continuing on, but data protection. But before we go further, more in data protection, any questions so far on the first two layers, network layer with firewall and NSGs and private endpoint, and the second one was access and authentication.
Couple questions, Surbhi.
Sure.
I have one from Vikraf said, as AD integrated login will comply against the firewall rules.
Very good question. So the AD authenticated login, right? You will have to make sure that those firewall rules, if you have a firewall rule from something which is outside of your AD, then we will have to do something more work with your cloud platform engineering team to have some, the next layer, because you'll have to like work more on the network side and the authorization from the network side too. But in general, it is something, if you have it taken care of, like here, right, for example, right, if it is I'm within Azure, I'm in the same Active Directory and I have some role, I can do that. But if I have to do the cross domain, then it's a different science. I am in the process of writing some blog post around these things. Like I don't have a blog and all, but I can definitely, do send that response in more detail to Gene and he can share more details. I can get some more, exact commands with our platform engineering teams.
Great. Would you like to also get the second question?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Perfect. That coming from Toph. I'm not sure if I pronounce it right. He said, sheeps that what if I have an Azure web app which use that Azure SQL, then I need to enable the ELA Azure services and resources to access the server.
1 second. Let me see if I can read the chat.
Let me ping you that the question, because there's a tons of people.
Yeah. And if something, this one is like what we can do, if this is like a long answer, we can, let's keep that. Definitely we'll come back because we have, time, and yeah, we'll come back to this question in little bit, more detail. Let me continue because then I would out of the screen share so I can see all the chat with them. Is that okay? Hello?
So feel free to proceed.
Yeah, because when I'm on screen share, right, it is difficult for me to see chat actually.
Right. No, I'm reading them. Don't worry. You can carry on.
Okay, fine. Yeah, thank you. And I'll come back to that question for sure. Okay. So coming to data protection. So like, see, we started with the life of data. Data went through the network layer. Now data is authorized, so it hit the real underneath layer. And here, this is something, the next layer, right? So now we have already ensured that we have proper authorization to connect and access the data, but that is still just the first step. Now we need to protect the data from the all aspects of our development, including connection, data at rest, data in over the wire or data in transit, and data in use. So these all are data protection options. Very important to understand. And data in transit, like let's start with that, right? So we did, if you guys noticed, there was one TLS version 1.0, 1.1 and 1.2. So this is the one, excuse me, it encrypts the data that is flowing over the wire between client and the database. That is the meaning. But Azure SQL database forces encrypted connection, whether the client or application enables it or not. So I really like that aspect. And also Azure SQL database offers enforcement of minimal TLS version. So we cannot just have like, data over the wire flowing around completely unencrypted, because it enforces that. And this is something like, since already it is set as by default with the TLS version 1.2, so we really from the Azure SQL side, we need not to do anything. Transparent data encryption, TDE. That is what we would be using for our next demo. What is TDE? So see, core concept is the SQL Server engine will encrypt and decrypt the data to the files as data is written and read from the disk. So now, you must be thinking that this one is a PaaS serverless kind of database. Why I'm worried about something which is underneath on the file level getting written on the disk, right? So the one of the benefit, like obviously when data is encrypted at the file level, for any offline attempt to access the file or the database, that also there can be like attack, like malicious users are able to access the database files at the data center. So they would not be do that. But the best thing is that, when we have this kind of data at rest security enabled, this actually shows the Microsoft commitment, even though it is a serverless and or the PaaS offering data, relational data engine offering from an Azure side. It shows the commitment. Like this is exactly the mindset, right? That commitment that irrespective of things are like not DBAs in our usual on-prem or lift and shift kind of model in IS in SQL Server we would have. It's a PaaS underneath file, but still the data at rest encryption by default is enabled. Okay. So now you would be thinking, okay, TDE is great. It is underneath. It is by default enabled. So why do we even worry about that, right? That, oh, I have TDE enabled in Azure SQL. We don't have to worry about data at rest encryption. So there is something more here. Okay. So what is that? So one is, even though by default it is encrypted, many times there is like there's another concept. Let me introduce the concept and then we would dive into demo for that concept. That concept is called BYOK, bring your own key, or CMK, or customer managed key. So SQL Server provides a method to use an extensible key management provider to protect the database encryption keys to encrypt the data with TD. So this is something like many times, right? Many companies or many like, you have like a compliance rule that you should be FIPS level 2 encrypted. You should not be the traditional TD certificate based encrypted. So you have no option but to pick the different than just the by default TD configured, and that option is BYOK. So without further, going in like a little bit more in this detail, let's go to demo and then we can understand more on that. So what I'm doing, I'm going back to my sec mindset. And first I want to show that what does this mean, that BYOK and all that. So in sec mindset, transparent data encryption. So in sec mindset, what I have done already, this one is using customer managed key. And let's go to no sec mindset, because that is where we will be able to understand the difference and we'll be configuring further. Okay, so in no sec mindset, we have a service managed key. So this step one in that, from the understanding and how you would be already start thinking about your next step. So data at rest security, Microsoft has taken care of that piece very well in Azure SQL. Your data at rest, in fact, it is double encryption. This data at rest, it is encrypted with TDE, and underneath your file level or storage itself is also encrypted. However, we do have many times like our compliance requirement. Hey, we cannot have server managed key. You need to have your own customer managed key, your own CMK. Okay, so we can pick that option. Okay, because now we have a requirement to pay encrypt it with that Azure Key Vault, which is something like, we want to have like more separation of duties. We want to create an environment where not everything is completely dependent on DBAs where they already have elevated privileges. So in that case, we are going with the customer managed key. Okay, when I pick this customer managed key option, there is a couple of other things with additional accessories we would require to support this option. So what does that mean? That we need Azure Key Vault, we need to create key. So that is something obviously you can understand, right? That you have a little bit more configuration thing for the one-time configuration. So now since I said Azure Key Vault, let's go to the Azure Key Vault. And we'll come back to this side. This one is we have already configured one Azure Key Vault, AKV BYOK sec mindset. So now when you talk about key vaults and you're already talking about a very next level of data at rest security with BYOK, and we are like we understand that there is more expense, there more cost involved, you have to do more configuration, and then there is operational overhead also, because later on you have a key rotation and all those things. Also, one more aspect is that if you have an enterprise scale environment like hundreds of clients, then there will be hundreds of key vaults. You cannot have like everybody's BYOK keys stored in the same key vault. So even though you did FIPS level 2, hey, yeah, I'm CMK, but every client's keys are sitting together on in one key vault, then somewhere else you are like doing a huge violation. So that is why I said that in the beginning, right? Your own scenarios, your own situations. So you would have a proper like an enterprise scale naming convention per client, this key vault and the key rotation, and like a big Pandora of things. Okay. So this key vault, some very quick things to understand here. When you create a key, like this one is the key we have created. So it comes with whatever is your key type, key size, like these are internal algorithms, right? And also expiration date. When I'm creating my own key, it's important that we have like a 1.5 year or that kind of, expiration date involved. And so that we can do the key rotation. And then certain permissions it would be requiring so that it can actually perform all the, database encryption operation using this particular AKV key. Then another thing is access policy. It's important that when you create those keys, then with your application you would be having like get, unwrap and wrap, so that that on the fly when database is using this key vault and encrypted, it can understand that and with these permissions. So when we go back to no sec mindset, that is where we were trying to configure BYOK, and we are back here again on the same screen with TD. So we pick customer managed key. Okay. Now I have already created my Azure supporting Azure services to be able to pick customer managed key. So that is why we go ahead, we select a key. So now I'm going to select from the key vault. So what is your key vault? And my key vault is AKV BYOK sec mindset. What is your key? BYOK SQL no sec mindset. Here is the key version. Okay. Because then from when I said operational overhead, right? So I'm not looking at this thing in a negative way for overhead, right? I just want you guys to understand what does that mean. So this is the whole point of doing this whole thing was so that we want to separate DBAs and the key vault administrator duties. We want to separate, like giving too much power to DBAs. So that is where our next slide would be talking about this thing. But in this method, customer is responsible for key management BYOK and operations for an encryption purpose. Let me go. And we have another entity in this picture that is called Key Vault Administrator. And this version is nothing but aligned. This Key Vault key version is associated with this particular key, which is set to expire in 1.5 years. Once it expires, before that, we need to create like a new version of the key. That is like a transparent operation. Okay, you need not to restart your Azure SQL instance or do anything else here and there. This whole thing is transparent to your application. And when I click select here, so before I select here, let me show one more aspect so that it would be now create like really good understanding about this aspect. So this is the one I'm connected to sec mindset. Okay, when I run this query, okay, this query is basically nothing but checking the database encryption state. So in this query, in this one, when you see this asymmetric key here, what it is telling me that AZ sec mindset is encrypted with asymmetric key. What does this mean? That I have already customer managed key for my sec mindset data. For my no-sec mindset data, I have not done that yet. I'm just, we are in the process of doing it. So, excuse me, this one is no-sec mindset. And if I run the same query, which is something like you guys know, right? When you configure a database, by default TDs in database is encrypted with TD. So this is the one which I wanted to explain, that here it is encrypted with a certificate. So this certificate is the one traditional TDE. Now we go back to our Azure SQL. And here when I click select, so what I am doing here basically, let me save this also. For no-sec mindset, we have basically deployed BYOK model and configured Azure Key Vault and a key with a key rotation. And this is the particular my key. And that is how this one is the customer managed key. So now if I go back to my same SQL instance for no-sec mindset, which just now we saw by default was certificate. And if I run the same query again, this one is asymmetric key. So one thing is, okay, there are some overheads, but it is not something that, it is transparent to this underneath data, like a file layer encryption, file level encryption is transparent and just automatically change to the different FIPS level 2 kind of model or the compliance requirement, whatever you have had. And now it is asymmetric key. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation and let me go to the previous slide where we were. So what we did data at rest with BYOK, and within BYOK, as I mentioned earlier, that separation of duties. When you have a BYOK, that then you have a separate Azure Key Vault administrator role, and those are the people who are taking care of like key rotation aspect, and it is sort of DBAs have been isolated from this or separated from this picture, not isolated. It's a good thing to do. Okay, so now I'm just coming back. Dynamic data masking, I'll just cover in one of the slide. Let me just see if I covered this whole thing completely. Yeah, so far so good. So moving along. Okay, so the next one is always encrypted. Now, always encrypted. There were some very cool changes recently in January. I'll go back and see that if something, because there is I couldn't find a really good slide around the latest changes, but all in all, it has like just one of the driver instead of a separate one. It has can be installed on application server, and I'll explain a little bit here. So how we are going through this life of data at data in transit, data over the wire security, right, which we discussed, which we are just doing a quick recap. Then we went through the data at rest, data at the file level security. Now the another aspect in the data lifecycle is data in use for query processing inside the database system. Now let's say consider this type of attack. When let's say a rogue malicious machine administrator or a DBA run an arbitrary query against any table and extract confidential information. So we need to encrypt this data in use state, but you can see that we have like now two conflicting goals here, right? We want to give elevated privileges to DBAs, but we don't want to see them data. So this is the system, right? So the system has basically, but also on top of that, we want system to process queries and return results. So we do not want DBAs, admin, hackers, and malwares to see plain text data. So this paradigm is called confidential computing. Query processing without exposing sensitive data to admin, hackers, or malwares. In this case, Azure SQL provides this unique security feature, always encrypted, to achieve confidential computing state. It makes encryption transparent to application. So as you can see, right, an always encrypted enabled driver installed on the client computer would achieve this by automatically encrypting and decrypting sensitive data in the client application. So that end goal from the database side, it would be encrypted. But while on its data in use, right, while reaching to the application server, it would be in the plain text so that end user would still see the full data, complete data, what they are supposed to see. So this is the one which is something like, you need to make your applications also aware about always encrypted features. So data in use is something, it's not no immediate like thing where like how we did BYOK. Within our control, we can do that with our Azure Key Vault administrators. But here you would have to make sure that your application is also always encrypted friendly. And you have those drivers installed and everything is working after those drivers installation also. Moving along, the last thing, which is not many people argue that why dynamic data masking is even in the security feature. So there are like various aspects, because in Azure SQL, first of all, it is even more easy to like use, and it is like one of the very effective feature. Might not be the best thing for your production, but really good for your development environment, because many times you have a scenario, restore production backup to development, and then you are scrubbing some data, but still like there are so many roles and so many people testing on development, but difficult to control everything. So you can just have the dynamic data masking deployed. And in this one, like as I said, it is easy to deploy in Azure SQL. You can add a mask and then pick your columns, and then those columns would appear as like star star, or it would not appear as a proper plain text data for people in that particular role who are not supposed to see this dynamic data masking. Okay, so this one is like I'm moving to the one of the most exciting feature, because dynamic data masking is still like a known and old thing, and we know how tools and other things and limitations, everything. And as I said, it is much better in Azure SQL. Here comes my favorite part: threat protection and detection. Trust me, in like on-prem days or even in cloud, if you are like having like a SQL Server VM in IS, it is much better. But in on-prem days, like you were planning the whole show on your own, and it's still like not like completely sure that if you are properly protected. So SQL, I'll actually, I'll go randomly, pick a lot of things, and then we'll come back here like little more organized and sequential manner. So from the, as I said, right, that there are, as you can see in these boxes, let's start with the Azure Defender. So now there are two types of Azure Defender, one for the SQL vulnerability assessment. That is something like your resident in-house security expert. Then the second thing is Azure Defender for SQL threat protection. That threat protection is like a 24/7 watchdog, monitors traffic coming in and out of your database, and alerts on any suspicious activity. And then that as the last box is Azure Security Center integration. This is like one-stop dashboard of your security posture. So these are the things, and we will do demo around all these things. I'll create like a SQL injection attack and then show you how it is actually creating all those things. So moving to, okay, so auditing, right? Let me go back to our demo environment. Okay. So what is, let's go to set mindset, our happy place. We like to live there. And in that sec mindset, here we go, auditing. So this one is something, right? As you see, in enable SQL Server Auditing. So this one is auditing, like it tracks the database events and it writes them to a log when you enable it. But when you enable, you are enabling at server level. And then what kind of events by default it is going to track? Batch completed group, successful database authentication, failed database authentication. And when we talk about writing somewhere, right? So somewhere many people even think, we have to have some storage or log analytics or event hub. Like these all are also different sciences on its own. So we are not going that much detail, but there can be arguments that we would have extra expense. Trust me, every penny is worth it. We need to have it. No more question, no more doubt. Make sure that you convince your management for have auditing enabled. So from the server level auditing, there is one more cool thing here, like in the this side here or further down on this screen. Enable auditing for Microsoft support operation. So so when we have this option, what does that mean? like many times, like, because obviously here now the Microsoft is the vendor. People, you have a case with Microsoft, engineer would log in, for try to resolve issues, help you to resolve issues, troubleshoot, and take a look at multiple types of logs. Now here we have a compliance requirement that who is logging in from the vendor side. We need to know what were their activities. Are they like looking for some kind of information which they are not supposed to look at? And for, not only that compliance requirement, if we just take a step back for our own organization's trend analysis, how that my application is being accessed, just to make sure that we do not have any unauthorized access on the database. So this is another feature. And in fact, it gives you the option where you can separate the audit log destination, right? You can have like a separate log analytics workspace just for the vendor. So this can be done, enabled, and it's another feature to know. So now here still we are at the server level. So now let's go to the database level. Here is my database, sec mindset. And in the database level, when you have it enabled from the server level, then your database would also inherit the exact same events, even though sometimes it feels like double that thing, but it would inherit the same events which you are at the server level you are monitoring. And here are the audit logs. So if I just quickly go and take a look at my dashboard, and this is the one. Let me go because I'm not going to the GDPR or confidential yet. That is data classification. Ignore that. Excuse me. So for the 3 events which we just now saw, authentication, and I might have some failed login in where it is. Oh, for no sec mindset, I've not even enabled it. Otherwise, for no sec mindset, I would have some failed login also. So these all are the events which were happening on the database, and auditing is capturing every event. Okay, so let's move to next option, which is the Microsoft Defender for cloud, right? So one second, let me go back. Oops, I did something. I'm going to just why I'm like moving fast, because this all thing is I'm going to cover in the demo. So let's go back to demo environment here. So now let's go back to the server level. And what is this Microsoft Defender for cloud? So Azure Azure Defender for cloud is actually configured Microsoft Defender for at the subscription level all the way up. So when you have Microsoft Defender is enabled for the Azure Defender, enabled at the subscription level, by default you will get this option that do you want to enable it for your SQL Server level or not. So since I have set this on for sec mindset, that is why this one is like it is all looking for vulnerability. It is vulnerability assessment and also doing the SQL threat detection. For SQL threat detection, like SQL engine attack, brute force attack, right? Even I can set the alert for my some email address. So as soon as I create the scenario, I'll get these alerts too. So now this is the one when we see here in Microsoft Defender. So by default, it is you can enable once you enable at the subscription level, you will get this option and you can enable it here at the server level too. Okay, now let's go back to our database and how it looks from the database perspective, because we want to go in detail on our vulnerability assessment and we want to go in detail on Azure threat protection. So here is the vulnerability assessment. And as I said, right, vulnerability assessment is nothing but like an in-house expert, security expert, which is helping you to remediate known database vulnerabilities. Okay, so these, like as you see, VA2026.165 and all, these all are known database vulnerabilities, mostly by driven by CIS benchmarks and already been fed into your, and the mind of your database. So, or the mind of your Azure Defender for the SQL. So it is continuously keep watching. It's like keep watching, and then it for these known vulnerabilities. Now, for example, here what we see. Server level firewall root should be tracked and maintained at a strict minimum, because I did create one server level firewall. I tried to create earlier before this demo. Now, it is not only, gives you the known vulnerability view, but also sometimes in our environment, we have no option but to accept that particular vulnerability. So it is like you can approve as baseline or you can clear the baseline. And there is another thing on demand you can do scan too, and it is like, trust me, it is like really low key kind of thing. So don't worry, during middle of the business hours you are doing some scan for some kind of urgency and all that, that can be done too. So this one is the vulnerability scan, and if I go back and check my security incidents in Azure Defender, right? So this is the one. Let me go to, so what I did actually right before, so let's grab a query which would actually create one SQL injection attack. So there it is, and if I run that in sec mindset, right? So these queries are like, they are there, right? So anybody can like just go and like pick that, and I'm just using that for the demo purpose, so that I can show that. So this one is the SQL potential SQL injection attack, and when you, so it takes few more seconds and you would see that another, SQL injection attack would appear here. Let me go back and yeah, so it takes some time to appear, but it would appear all the way here in the potential SQL injection attack. Okay, now there is another view which somebody else is watching, right? We cannot just rely on this picture here. So we can have all the way up at the subscription level. If you go right here in the subscription level, then you have those, where did that go? Security. Yeah. So as I said, that Microsoft Defender for Cloud is there from the subscription level, right? So in the subscription level also, where your entire organizations like high level security teams have visibility, when we have set those, at the once you have Azure Defender enabled, that is even in fact going to pick that alert, and then it would do like whatnot, you have escalation method or reach out to this and that, everything it will be like going on around here. So this one is like the highest level you can get the visibility on high priority alerts. Okay, so let's go back to, so this is all about, the SQL Defender and your Azure Defender for SQL Server with vulnerability assessment and vulnerability assessment and threat protection. Moving to the next one, data classification. So it is a simple thing that basically it provides basic capabilities for discovering, classifying, labeling, and reporting the sensitive data in your database. So now, since I have, we have this particular data protection already set, like data classification. So if I go all the way here, let me just, I know it is something we are reaching time, so I'll be real quick. We go to set mindset and we go to our database. And as you can see, we already have set some classifications. So what does that mean? That I have few very simple tables. Employee, if somebody is like doing a select star from salary, that is something from, based on my organization's requirement. It's a highly confidential GDPR kind of data. So what we have done, we have created this classification, classified this sensitivity level of this data. Now, on the other hand, because just before this demo, I already queried, so I can quickly show you guys. On the other hand, there is one employee or there is one DBA actually, right? That person is like just querying select salary from employees, which is something underneath we have classified as highly confidential data. So in that case, here comes the auditing magic, right? And that is why I really like this auditing side, and I always, like highly recommend we should have. So this one is highly confidential GDPR. And earlier it was not there just because I did all my select queries, right? I ran it. So that is why, like, it will give you full picture. Yeah. So now it will give you that this was the somebody like Surbhi, right? I ran this select start from customer. This one, okay, so it is actually even picking because I did from the customer table. So it is picking that particular result set also. And if I just go back to all other records. Hmm. That's the problem. Auditing is very sensitive. It picks everything are we running because yeah. So this is something like, since just now I did not do that. So it is like picking more the other column because I have customer city and other personal information also set as private confidential information. So in this case, let's go back to Azure Purview integration is more like unified data governance solution, helps you to manage and govern your on-prem, multi-cloud, software as a service data. Easily, it can create like, a holistic up-to-date map of your data landscape. We do not have it here in this particular demo. And we already did data as a discovery and classification, right? So now where are we? We are back to our ever evolving data security layers. We literally picked each and every layer, went through, deployed those layers. And then if you see that no sec mindset versus sec mindset, that is what exactly, it was talking about, that no sec mindset. There was no auditing enabled, no Azure threat protection enabled, and no data classification versus on the other sec mindset SQL instance, we deployed all of those things. So we touched each layer in defense system and secured it. Still, we cannot say that our database is fully secured. So the end statement is like, and the journey continues. Thank you so much. I know we have less time, but still we have 5 minutes. I'll try to cover as many questions as possible. And I can turn on my camera. So that I can see the chat windows also. Okay, guys, any question?
Questions? Do you want me to read it for you? Hello?
Yeah, so I'm just, I see type full name.
Let me give them access to unmute themselves. So this way we can make it more interactive.
Yeah, but we have 4-5 minutes. So if just in case I'm not able to cover any session, we can, you can, you have my contact information right here.
Yep, let me give them access to unmute. For some reason, seeing just slow down on me. In the meantime, if you guys have a question, feel free to type it.
Okay, I see one question actually. Yeah. So from Sasha Top, what if I have an Azure web app which uses that Azure SQL? Then I need to enable the allow Azure services and resource to access this server. Okay, so if you have a web app, right? Very good question, actually. I'm just thinking it out loud. So then somewhere else you would be creating, an extra layer of policies, like how we saw that Azure Defender posture. You will have so you have to just make sure that from the vulnerability scan, anything coming from that particular IP address or that IP address range, which is like a web app, or anybody can connect, right? But you have to make sure that you have then all other defense in depth layers have been taken care of, and you have the policies and rules which are all the time creating alerts, so that any connection is, for example, running a SQL injection query because they already made it, they are here on your database. But now they are running the next level of threatening kind of activities, malicious activities. So then you have to see that rest assured your data at rest. That is why this is called defense in depth, right? So that you have the other layers where you can enable next level of monitoring. But yeah, this is a good point, because sometimes, we are so confined to our small use case scenarios or working in something. So we say keep it disabled, but totally agree. There are scenarios like other than like 0.01% when you have different areas where you have to enable it. So then you have to just focus on the next layer of security other than the network, and then access and authentication and threat protection and auditing rely on all those areas.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm running the vulnerability scan, and I'm complying with that. Plus, I have a developer machine where I deploy schema changes to the database, and so how can I secure that down more, because that machine has to pierce through and get into the SQL database to do the schema changes. So you were defining virtual network, and you had VMs inside that. I don't have a VM inside that. It's an external developer machine.
So you have I'm just trying to follow the question again. So you have like an external developer machine, but you do not have a VM inside, right? But that is, at least that developer machine, right? That one machine.
Correct.
Right. So then you can whitelist the IP address of that machine, because that is exactly same scenario. Your developer machine is at Starbucks, and then here is Azure in the cloud. Like how I do sometimes, like today what I did, my laptop SQL instance, right? That is my developer machine, for example. And I do not have private endpoint, but so I showed you we cannot connect because we had disabled that connection. If I whitelist my development box IP address in that, make that as a firewall rule, you can connect that. I always do that when I have to demo, build like major performance, bad performance scenarios, and show that on-prem to cloud we are migrating, and here is my workload and how would I migrate. When I try to simulate those scenarios, that is what I do. My development box IP address, I whitelist. But then remember, then automatically other layers, they know this is the whitelisted guy, this is a good guy. It can connect, but not everything. So
thank you.
Whitelist the IP address. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, this is Grant here, Surbhi. Very good session. I have one last question. So when I have a sensitive data according to a GDPR compliance, so I'm a DBA having highest privilege. So I should not see the sensitive data, as you said. So we can find out whoever is trying to view the sensitive data. And
yes.
I need to know who modified particular column or a particular row.
Very good question. So for that, let's see, remember what we did. See, we did our default auditing, right? We did a server level auditing, which enabled batch completed, SQL login to select success and fail. Then we classified so that those events are getting captured in the audit. Then here in the data classification, we classified salary is classified. But now who is changing salary, right? Who is accessing? So when you classify that as highly confidential data, then I wish we would have like a few more. So and I run a query update, then it would come in the same data, highly confidential data classified audit log. So when you click on that, it will open all the detail, right? It will show you who executed the query for that update statement. Update salary, right? You run a query. I have done that all that. So today I was only showing a select salary, but let's say that they update salary from employee and then some number change and somebody run that. So you should be able to see that. But the bottom line is, since you classified that data, right? That is why you are able to see that. If you have not classified the data, But here you have only 3 events which you are capturing. Then you will have to enable from the database level few more events to capture, so that because, like for example, another scenario, employee table is not classified and you are only monitoring for 3 events: server level, batch completed, login failure, login success. Then on the database level, there are some auditing events where the database activities, the DDL and DML activities can be audited too. Typically that level of auditing adds like 2-3% of overhead, but doable kind of thing. So then you can do that. And that would put everything in the same log analytics workspace which we enabled for auditing. So no other place to go. Everything is right there. Learn little bit of custo to write a query or generate alert. Otherwise you can go yourself and take a look at that.